Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's session of Research Methods in Business. And for today, we'll be examining participant observation. Now, in this workshop, we will be able to examine the role that observation may play as a data collection method. We will then proceed to examine two types of observation, that is the participant observation and the structured observation, and of course, some of their applications. And we'll kind of try to understand some of the threats to participant observation. Now, that takes me to my first question of the day. What is observation? Now, a quick definition will be that observation is a qualitative research technique where researchers observe participants' ongoing behavior in a natural situation, right? Here, you as a researcher can actually capture data on what participants do as opposed to what they say they do, right? So observation is a qualitative research technique where researchers observe participants' ongoing behavior in a natural situation. Here, the goal is that you as a researcher can actually capture data on what participants do as opposed to what they say they do. Now, one of the unique elements of observations is that it actually adds to the richness or luxury of your data. And observations are quite rewarding and very enlightening to pursue, right? And if your research questions and objective are concerned with what people do, right, an obvious way in which to discover this is to actually watch them do it, right? You see the way they do it, you're kind of concerned, and you are able to capture those rich meanings, right, of their actions, right? And of course, observations involves that systematic observation, right, that recording the description, the analysis, the interpretation of people's behavior. Now, two types of observations stand out, and we've got participant observation and structured observation. Two types of observations: participant observation and structured observation. Now, participant observation is largely qualitative, right? Very inductive, right? Participant observation is qualitative, very inductive, and it is focused on discovering the meanings that people attach to their actions. Participant observation is very qualitative and is focused on discovering the meanings that people attach to their actions. And now, on the other hand, structured observation is largely quantitative and very deductive, right? And it's more concerned with the frequency, right? The frequency, the numerical analysis of those actions. Now, so that takes me again to my second question, right? So remember I mentioned that observation is divided into participant observation and structured observation. So for this purpose, for this research, because we're focused on qualitative participant observation, we're not really concerned with structured observations. Our goal is to focus on the inductive element, right, of our observations, which is participant observation. So the second question of the day is, what is participant observation? Right, so participant observation is where the researcher, right, joins in the group being studied, right? Participant observation is where the researcher joins in the group being studied. Now, here the researcher observes their behavior, right, and is able to capture the meanings, right, and the interpretations of what the participants do. Right? Participant observation is where the researcher joins in the group being studied and observes their behavior. Now, participant observation again is used in qualitative research and ethnography, right? It is used in qualitative research and ethnography. And for participant observation, it aims to gain a close and intimate familiarity, right, with a given group of individuals. Participant observation aims to gain a close and intimate familiarity with a given group of participants or given group of individuals. Now, with regards to participant observation, right, it has its roots in social anthropology, right? Of course, the Chicago school encouraged its usage, right? Encouraged the students to adopt more participant observation, and this has actually gained traction over the years, since the 1920s to date, right? And the goal of around participant observation is focused on getting to the roots or to the foundation of the problem, right? Getting to the foundation of what is going on within a social setting. I really like that, right? Participant observation is focused on getting to the roots or getting to the foundation of what is going on within a social setting. Now, with regards to participant observation, the researcher, right, attempts to participate fully, right? You try to pretend to be a part of that world, right? You participate fully in the lives and activities of the subjects. And with that, you technically become a member of that group or a member of that culture or a member of that community. And by being a member of that culture or by immersing yourself in that community, right, you are able to understand their experiences. You are able to see those meanings, right, from the lens of the social actors, right? You are able to share their experiences, right? Not just by observing it, but also by feeling it, right? And for me, because I've done this before, and you can see me in that picture, right? I was able to participate fully, right? I became a member of that group I went to examine, right? And I shared their experiences. I was at various functions whereby they did their trade, and I was able to see firsthand the real interpretations of the meanings of their actions, right? So with that, I was able to share their experiences by not merely observing, right, but also feeling it, right? It's quite interesting and exciting, right, to conduct some participant observation, right? I kind of like some these definitions, right? And if we take some of the definition from Delbridge and Kirkpatrick, right, in 1994, right, and they note that participant observation implies a research strategy of immersion, right? Don't forget that, right? Participant observation implies a research strategy of immersion by you, the researcher, right, within a social setting or within a research setting. And your objective, your goal, your aim, right, of sharing in the people's life is to learn their symbolic world, is to understand their symbolic world, what their world means to them, right? The way of life, the way things are done, right? You are immersing yourself to understand people's symbolic world, their real world, right? Because this is what's explaining. You're trying to eliminate their real world. You're trying to bring light to their real world, right? And this is quite different from data collection by means of questionnaire, where you probably will know little or nothing, right, about the context in which those respondents or the people within those social settings operate, right? So with regards to observation, you're immersing yourself into the real world. Now, Delbridge and Kirkpatrick also mentioned, right, that in the social sciences, we cannot hope to adequately explain the behavior of social actors unless we at least try to understand their meanings, right? So this kind of supports the previous definition that you must be able to immerse yourself into the real world, right, with the objective of sharing people's lives while attempting to learn their social world or their symbolic world. So the symbolic world is what their world means to them, right? These are the interpretations of their real world, right? Their understanding of the world in which they operate, right? So your goal, right, is to observe their behavior, right? And your goal is to gain that close and intimate familiarity with that culture or with those group of individuals. Now, what about the role of the researcher, right? And I think Gill and Johnson in 2002 developed some great categorization of the role the participant can adopt, right? And these roles are actually categorized into four. The first is the complete participant. The second is the complete observer. Third is the observer as a participant. And the fourth is the participant as an observer. Some kind of point to consider is the first two roles. So the first two roles are the complete participant and the complete observer, right? These two roles involve you as a researcher concealing your identity. So this is those two roles, that is the complete participant and complete observer, right? You conceal your identity. Now, this actually has that significant advantage of you're not conditioning the behavior of the research subject you're studying, because sometimes when you let them know your role, right, there's a chance they might not act as they should do. But of course, this also has some ethical consideration. Now, the second two is the observer as the participant, and the participant as the observer, right? So here you are revealing your purpose to those with whom you are trying to investigate, right? And here you're letting them know who you are and what you're mixing in that research setting, right? So the idea is the later two, which is the participant as the observer as participant and the participant as an observer, are less problematic, right? The earlier two, the complete participant and the complete observer, are believed to be problematic because of the ethical considerations. So let's quickly run through them, right? So in regards to the complete participant, right, here you do not reveal your true purpose to the group members, right? And within this kind of observation, right, you as a complete participant, your role as a researcher, right, the complete participant's role sees you as a researcher attempting to become a member of the group in which you are performing the research, right? Sometimes, most cases, of course, within complete participants, you do not reveal your purpose. Now, you may be able to justify this role on pure research ground because, like I mentioned earlier, if you tell them your role, right, there's a chance they might not act as they should do, right? So, because if you were to explain your research objectives to this group, right, it is rather unlikely that they would actually cooperate, right? For instance, if you wanted to examine the extent of lunchtime drinking in a particular organization, right? So if you mentioned your objective to your colleagues or to the group you're examining, it is rather unlikely that they would cooperate because most employers, of course, they discourage lunchtime drinking, right? So now because you are not revealing your true position, this raises the problem of ethics, right? Because you are in a position where you're actually spying on people, right? So you've gained their trust, and somehow, if you do not reveal your true purpose, right, you are also violating that trust, right? So you are in a position where you are spying on people, you have probably become friends, right? People that have come to trust you as well as your colleagues, right? So there are objections on pure research grounds that you've worked so hard at getting the trust of your colleagues, and you value that trust when it is gained, such that even when you are researching, you do not really capture the real essence, right? Because you've gained that trust, you want to be able to protect those guys. So there's a chance that you might lose sight of your research purpose, right? The objective, the detached perspective that all researchers need will be lost. So yes, that's another point. So there are 2 points, right? The first point is if you if you're seen as spying and you do not reveal your identity, right, it is seen as you're breaking the trust, right, and you're violating the trust that has been built. And also, in the second scenario is that because you've also built the trust, you also want to be able to preserve that trust. And when you start to preserve that trust, right, you proceed to lose sight of the research process, right, or you lose sight of the research purpose, right? And once you lose sight of that research purpose or that detached perspective, then that research is already lost. Now, quickly for the complete observer, here you do not reveal the purpose of your activity to those you're observing. And unlike the complete participant role, you do not take part in the activity. So for complete participants, you take part in the activities. For complete observer, you do not take part. You do not review, right? You do not take part, right? For complete observer, right? So for example, a complete observer role may be used in studying consumer behavior in a supermarket, right? And your research question may concern your wish to observe consumers at the checkout, right? And which checkouts do they choose? So with complete observer, unlike complete participant role, you do not take part in the activities of the group, right? And you do not reveal the purpose of your activity to those you are observing. So the other two, which we say that the less problematic, are observer as participant and participant as observer, right? So with observer as participant, right, here you would be a spectator, right? And the researcher would not reveal the purpose of the activity to those they were observing. However, your identity to the research as a researcher will be known, right? So your identity as a researcher would be known. The truth is, everyone would know your purpose, right? Everyone would know your purpose, right? But you will not reveal the purpose of the activity to those that they were observing, right? So this will kind of give you that advantage, right, of you being able to focus on your research role, right? And of course, again, another advantage is that you'll be able to concentrate on your interactions or discussions with the participants. And the final one is participant as observer, right? And in the role of participant as observer, you reveal your purpose as a researcher, right? You and the subjects are aware of the fact that it is a fieldwork relationship, right? You are particularly interested in gaining the trust of that group, right? And because your role as a researcher or the investigator is clear, you can ask questions of your subject towards enhancing your understanding, right? I think this kind of also leads to a good advantage, as Robson 2002 mentioned, that this is that the key informants are likely to adopt a perspective of analytic reflection on the processes in which they're involved. So with regards to participant observation, right, you and your subjects are aware of that of the fact that it is a fieldwork relationship, right? And here you reveal your purpose as a researcher. So this is a quick typology of participant observations. You might want to capture this in your essay, right? So a quick snapshot of the participant as an observer, the observer as a participant, the complete observer, and the complete participant. And you can find this in Saunders et al. In 2016. So some of the factors that determine the choice of your participant role, of course, the purpose of your research, right? Why you've chosen to undertake the research. So, right, so for the purpose of the research will kind of inform what type of role you adopt, right? Your purpose of your research would kind of influence the role you adopt. The time you also have, right? If you've got that time, the timing of your research or the time or the tenor of that research can also influence what type of role you might want to adopt. The degree to which you feel suited to the participant observation. So you believe that if you clarify your purpose, it might be a disadvantage. And if you do not clarify, it might be an advantage for you. So that degree to which you feel suited to the observation can influence your choice of what participant role you choose, right? Also the access, right? Sometimes when the access is not, when you don't really get that, when you think you might have difficulties with access, right? This might also influence the role you choose. And of course, ethical consideration. And if you are someone who you think that the ethical consideration might be an issue, you might choose a participant role that might not have so much ethical problems. So some of the quick advantages and disadvantages of participant observation, right? It is good at explaining what is going on, right? It's very, very good at getting to the roots, right? To the foundation of what is happening, right? It heightens your awareness of the significant social issues, the social meanings, the social challenges, right? It's particularly useful for researchers working within their own organization, but of course, also other organizations not similar to theirs, right? Right. And another good advantage is that some participant observation affords the opportunity for the researcher to experience for real the emotions of those who are being researched. Disadvantages, right? Very, very time consuming. It is time consuming. It is expensive. Sometimes it is risky, right? It is a high level of risk in most cases, right? I remember when I went to do my research in that part of Africa, after I left, there were some kind of skirmishes, some kind of ethnic fighting, and anything could have happened. So some element of risk to it, right? It can be very time consuming, right? There's that ethical dilemma, right? What else? Access can be difficult, really, really difficult. Data recording is often very difficult, and after you've captured the data, you also have to transcribe. So it is kind of time consuming, right? And when that proximity to the researchers or to the researched people, or the proximity to the participants, can also lead to observer bias and kind of remove the richness or the uniqueness of your study. So we'll kind of move on again. Some of the threats to validity and reliability, it is very good to understand this, right? And it's quite important to understand what validity means. And when you see validity in research, the validity concerns whether the findings, right, the findings from your research, right, are they really about what they appear to be about, right? Is your findings, right? Your findings, are they real, right? Do they reflect what you've mentioned, right? Do they mean for real what you've investigated or what you've gone to uncover, right? And with regards to participant observation is very high on validity because it is focused on a social phenomena in a natural setting, right? But some of the threats that you may face, that participant observation may face, is with threats of history and threats of maturation. Now, with history, one may decide to study the opinions of customers that the customers may have about the quality of a particular product. So this is an example, right? So for you as a researcher, you may decide to study the meanings or interpretations that your clients or customers may have about the quality of a particular product manufactured by a particular organization. However, if that research is conducted shortly after a major product recall, right? So for instance, if there was a major product recall, right, you know that this may actually have a dramatic and quite misleading effect on the nature of responses you will get. So from that historical element of it, right, if something has actually happened, right, this may affect people's interpretation. So for instance, if that thing didn't happen, if that historical effect didn't happen, right, the respondents may have a different view or a different perspective, right? So that's a threat to validity. The second threat is a threat of maturation. Now, maturation is defined as when there's that psychological process or psychological effect within an individual that occurs within a passage of time. And this may actually have an impact, right, on the research findings, right? When there's maybe a psychological effect maybe like boredom or tiredness or maybe loss of family member, right? Or loss of profit or revenue, right? Those things can actually affect the findings because of the state of mind of the participant at that given time. There's a chance that this may affect the threat of validity or the validity of your research. So how your participants respond, right, pre-data and post-data, can be as a result of how good they feel at that particular time or how bad they feel at that particular time. Now, like I mentioned, some of the influences can be boredom, can even be hunger. I remember some of the participants I met at first, right? They were kind of hungry. I was after they ate that they were strong enough and excited to want to talk to me, right? So you find that influences such as tiredness, hunger, boredom, inattention can actually impact responses. So participant observation is subject to the threats of history and threats of maturation. Now, regards to reliability, and both of them can actually come together, right? So, and you may want to ask, what does reliability mean? So reliability refers to the extent to which your data collection techniques or your findings are reliable, right? It refers to the extent to which your data collection analysis procedures will yield consistent findings, right? And in terms of assessing your reliability, right, some of the key questions you want to ask are, will the measures yield the same results in other occasions, right? Will similar observations be reached by other observers, right? Is there transparency in how sense was made from the data which you've captured? Now, the greatest threat to reliability, right, is the threat of observer bias, right? Observer bias. And as Delbridge and Kirkpatrick mentioned, that because we are part of the social world in which we are studying, right? Because we are part of that social world in which we are studying, it is very, very difficult for us to detach ourselves from it, right? Or for that matter, avoid relying on our common sense, right? Sorry. Or for that matter, avoid relying on our common sense knowledge and life experiences when we try to interpret it. So what Delbridge and Kirkpatrick is saying is that because we are part of that social world, it is very difficult for us to remove that element of bias, right? It is very, very difficult to remove that element of bias. So one of the questions someone may ask is, how can you overcome the problems of validity and reliability to give credence to observations? Of course, for validity, it's history and maturation. For reliability, right, the propensity for you to be able to remove your bias or to remove color to interpretations can be done through reflexivity. Reflexivity is that self-introspection, right, whereby you are trying to remove any form of bias, and you're trying to report the data fairly as accurately as possible. And a second approach to removing the threats of bias is what we call information verification, or what I like to call bracketing, right? And this is whereby, having gotten the findings from the participants, right, you go back and ask them, sir, is this what you meant when you mentioned this? So what you're trying to do is you are verifying, right? You are verifying from them. So you mentioned at last month that this is what happened. Is this what you meant, right? Is this what you meant? So you're trying to verify what they said. You are trying to ensure that you are capturing the accurate narratives of your respondents. So reflexivity and information verification or bracketing are two good ways to remove observer bias. So in summary, right, participant observation means that you are trying to join in the group being studied, right? You are trying to observe their behavior, right? And your goal is to gain a close and intimate familiarity with the given group of individuals, right? Participant observation means that you can adopt a number of potential roles, and this is differentiated by the degree to which your identity is concealed from the subject. Right? The main threats, like I mentioned, of reliability and validity are inherent in history, maturation, observation bias effects, right? And of course, with participant observation, right, the researcher participates in the lives and activities of those whom they're studying, right? And the goal is to get to the foundation of what is going on, or get to the roots, right, of that social phenomenon. Thank you, and speak to you soon.